The narcissistic husband does not walk alongside his wife. He walks ahead, expecting her to follow, not out of choice, but out of obligation. In his presence, affection is no longer unconditional. It becomes a currency, offered only when she conforms, withheld when she dares to be herself. He does not listen to understand. He listens to manipulate, to twist her words until she doubts her own clarity. What she feels is inconvenient. What she thinks is irrelevant. Over time, her voice grows quieter, not because she has less to say, but because the cost of speaking has grown too high. She begins to question not only his love, but her worth. This is the deepest wound. When a woman starts to believe that the mistreatment is her failure, not his cruelty, she forgets that love is meant to be a sanctuary, not a battlefield where her dignity is the price of peace. But no storm lasts forever. There comes a moment, not loud, but steady, when she sees the pattern, not the promise. She recognizes that waiting for change is not the same as living. In that moment, she does not fight him. She does not need to. She simply stops fighting herself. The way forward is not to change him, but to return to herself. To remember that she is not made to serve an illusion, but to live in truth. To walk not behind, not beneath, but side by side with those who see her clearly and love her as she is. When we speak about the foundation of a relationship, it is easy to assume that love alone is enough, that affection, vows, or shared memories will sustain a bond. But that is not always true, especially not when one person is consumed not with partnership, but with power. A narcissistic husband does not seek a companion. He seeks control. His desire is not to grow alongside another soul, but to dominate, to mold, and to dictate the shape of the relationship to serve his reflection. In such a space, there is no genuine connection, only hierarchy. And the painful part is that it often doesn't begin that way. In the beginning, he may present himself as charming, attentive, even deeply loving. But what appears as devotion is often a performance, a calculated effort to draw her in, to secure admiration. And once he has it, the mask begins to slip. What once felt like care begins to feel like surveillance. What once looked like protection now feels like policing. He wants to know where she is, not because he misses her, but because he cannot tolerate her autonomy. He wants her to confide in him, not to understand her, but to gather material he can use later if she ever dares to resist. In public, he may play the role of the proud husband, but behind closed doors he rewrites the script. She is no longer his equal. She is his audience, expected to applaud his moods, to absorb his blame, to bend so he never has to. When she tries to assert herself, even gently, he interprets it as defiance, a threat to his illusion of superiority. And so, he retaliates not always with shouting, not always with fists. Sometimes it's quieter, more dangerous. He withholds affection, withdraws presence, uses silence as a weapon. He creates an emotional climate where she is constantly walking on eggshells, trying to predict which version of him she will meet today. Love in this dynamic becomes a conditional thing, something she must earn, perform for, strive to deserve. And it's never enough, because he is not interested in mutuality. He is interested in control. He builds invisible walls around her world and calls it love. But it is not love. It is a slow dismantling of her freedom, her confidence, her sense of self. And still she tries. She tells herself, maybe if I'm more patient, maybe if I just explain better, maybe if I love harder, he'll change. She's not foolish, she's hopeful. But in a relationship built on control, hope becomes a kind of trap, because it keeps her focused on the version of him he pretended to be, rather than the reality of who he is. The tragedy here is not just his behavior, it's what she sacrifices trying to make it work, her peace, her voice, her joy. These are not small losses. These are the quiet deaths of who she used to be and who she was meant to become. But here's the truth. Control is not love. Control suffocates, love breathes. Control isolates, love includes. When a man needs to shrink his partner to feel tall, he is not strong, he is empty. And her shrinking is not her failure. It is a response to being unseen for too long. She doesn't need to fight him. She needs to remember herself. Because when she stops trying to earn the love that should have been freely given, she begins to reclaim something far more powerful, her own worth. Love is supposed to be the one place where we can exhale, a space where we're not earning our right to exist, but simply being met with presence, understanding, and acceptance. In a healthy relationship, love is a gift, freely given, not earned. But when you're with a narcissistic partner, love doesn't feel like a gift anymore. It feels like a transaction, something you receive only when you've performed just right, said the right thing, stayed quiet at the right moment, smiled when it hurt. The narcissistic husband treats affection like a currency. And he's the one who controls the bank. If you please him, you get a deposit, maybe a compliment, a tender word, a rare glimpse of warmth. But if you fall out of line, even slightly, the account gets frozen. You get the cold shoulder, passive, aggressive silence. Or worse, sudden rage that seems completely disconnected from the moment. It's unpredictable, it's exhausting, and it trains you, quietly, to stop showing up as yourself. This isn't love. This is manipulation disguised as intimacy. And over time, it teaches his wife something dangerous, that her value is based on how well she serves his emotional needs. That love is not a sanctuary but a performance, that who she is, when she's not pleasing, not perfect, not small, is unworthy of connection. He doesn't say this out loud. He doesn't need to. The message comes through clearly in his reactions. When she's joyful, but it's not about him, he pulls away. When she has a success, but it outshines him, he criticizes it. When she's in pain, but it inconveniences him, he minimizes it. Every emotional exchange becomes a test she didn't sign up for. And somehow, he always walks away feeling justified, while she's left questioning her sanity. What makes it more painful is that the highs are so intoxicating. That moment, he turns to her with affection, when he praises her in public, when he reaches out after days of distance. It feels like water in a desert. She tells herself, this is who he really is. This is the version I'm fighting for. And so she stays, not for the pain, but for the brief, fleeting moments of tenderness that seem to prove the pain was worth it. But here's the truth no one tells you when you're in it. Love that is only given when you're useful isn't love. It's control. If your worth in his eyes is conditional on how small you can make yourself to fit his narrative, it's not partnership, it's performance. And the scariest part is how normal it starts to feel. You start keeping score in your own mind. Was I too emotional? Did I say too much? Maybe I should have just let it go. You rehearse conversations before you have them, walk on eggshells around things that shouldn't even be problems, and you start to believe that peace only exists when you're invisible. But peace at the cost of your truth is not peace. It's surrendering your spirit in slow motion, And no one is meant to live like that, not for love, not for loyalty, not for history. Because love, when it's real, doesn't come with a ledger. It doesn't ask you to earn safety. It meets you where you are, even when you're messy, even when you're tired, even when you have nothing to give, especially then. And the moment she realizes that she never had to perform to be worthy of love, that's when everything begins to change. There's a subtle kind of damage that happens in a relationship with a narcissistic husband. One that doesn't leave bruises, but breaks something deeper. It's not just about what he says or does in moments of conflict. It's about how he slowly, methodically, begins to dismantle her sense of reality. And it's not accidental, it's strategic, because the more confused she becomes, the more control he gains. He doesn't need to shout to destabilize her. All he needs to do is question her version of events over and over again. That never happened, you're being too sensitive, you always make things about you. At first, she pushes back. She knows what she saw, she knows what she felt, but the more he twists her words, the more doubt creeps in. And when someone you love insists enough times that you're overreacting, you start to wonder if maybe you are. That's how it starts, not with force, but with erosion, a slow wearing down of her inner compass. He reframes the truth so often. She stops trusting her memory. She begins to rewrite her own instincts to keep the peace. She tells herself, maybe it was my fault, maybe I misunderstood, maybe I need to be more patient. And every time she does that, she moves a little further away from herself. That's the power he wants, not just over her choices, but over her mind. If he can control her perception, then he doesn't need to control her actions. She'll do it for him. She'll silence herself before he ever has to. She'll anticipate his moods. She'll second guess her feelings. She'll become so wrapped up in managing his version of the world that she forgets how to live in her own. This is not love. This is psychological warfare disguised as relationship. And what makes it so insidious is how invisible it is from the outside. Friends might see them at dinner and think, he's charming, he's funny, he seems like such a good guy. They don't see how he corrects her in private, how he rolls his eyes when she speaks, how he punishes her emotionally when she disagrees with him. He's not interested in connection, he's interested in being right, being superior, being unquestioned. So every disagreement becomes an opportunity to rewrite the story in his favor. If she's upset, he frames it as drama. If she sets a boundary, he calls it an attack. If she withdraws, he accuses her of being cold. Nothing she does is ever quite right, because the goalposts are always moving. And she starts to internalize that. She starts to feel like she's the problem, that she's difficult, that no one else would love her if even the man who promised to can't accept her. That's the final trick, getting her to believe his voice is the truth. But it's not. Her emotions are valid. Her experiences are real. Her memory is not broken. It's just being gaslit. And the longer she stays in that fog, the harder it becomes to remember that she once saw clearly, that she once trusted herself, that she once didn't need someone else to tell her what was real. The way out isn't loud, it's quiet. It's in the moment she pauses and says, "No, that's not what happened. I know what I felt." It's in choosing not to argue, but to detach, to stop explaining herself to someone who has already decided not to listen, to stop looking for clarity in a place built on distortion. And that shift, tiny, internal, powerful, is where the truth begins to find its way back in.